It's a pleasure for me to introduce to this stage Mr. Davey Shafik, whom I know for a couple of years, and I've heard some of Davey's talks. They're all fantastic. He's a great speaker. He's also a great writer of books. I have read, he does the certification guide for PHP for Zend, and I've read this book and I recommend it as one of the best tutorials even for introductory level or for masters. It doesn't matter. It's a good book for if you want to learn PHP. And also, Davey is a very active part of the PHP community. He's being also helping out and involved in the PHPWomen group as well. So, applause for Davey Shafik.
Hi. Thank you. I'm also responsible for T-Spaceship, and it is a UFO, nothing else. All right, so as Mikhail mentioned, I am Davey Shafik. I am the author of these 3 fine books, including the Zend Certification Study Guide. I'm a contributor to Zend Frameworks 1 and 2. I'm also the original author of PHAR, or PHP Archive. So what that means is I wrote it in PHP and somebody smarter wrote it in C. I'm also at dshafik on Twitter. I have a couple of patches and internals. I have a new one in there that got in for PHP 7 I'm happy about as well. And I'm at dshafik on Twitter. So I work for these guys, Akamai. We do amazing stuff with CDNs and scales, so check us out at developer.akamai.com. And I always mention this prompt. It's an initiative that myself and my coworkers started a couple years ago to get people talking about mental health and technology, which is a really, really important subject. So go check out mhprompt.org. All right. HHVM, or hip-hop VM. It started life in 2009 as HPHPC. And this was a cross-compiler from PHP to C++. It's created by Facebook. And for every single change that you made, you had to recompile the entire code base. And for Facebook, this took literally hours. It created huge binaries, and they were actually approaching the 2 gigabyte limit for Linux. And it had a PHP 5.2 feature set, which is not great. It was also missing support, even with 5.2 support, it was missing support for a whole bunch of features like eval, create function, kind of anything that created dynamic code, as well as stuff that we kind of take for granted, like namespaces and closures that came in 5.3. Most importantly, it broke the developer workflow. As a PHP developer, we are used to writing code, refreshing a browser, rerunning a command line. That's it. It's pretty much write and test. We couldn't do that in HPHPC because it took a couple hours for that change to actually propagate into a binary. Now, they came up with some sort of weird thing where it would pass through to PHP, but it was so slow, and it just wasn't working for them. So in 2013, they came out with Hip-Hop VM, or HHVM, and they actually started it in like 2012, but we learned about it in 2013. And rather than being a cross-compiler, this is an alternative runtime for PHP with JIT, and JIT is just-in-time compiler. There is no compiling process, and it is twice as fast as PHP in interpretive mode. We'll get into that in a little bit. If you get the JIT working correctly, it's ludicrously fast. It's bug-for-bug compatible with PHP. What that means is every time they find a bug, they replicate the behavior. They want it to act the same quirky way that PHP does, so your code will run as you expect, even if it's wrong. It has a 5.6-ish feature set with some 7 stuff starting to creep in. So that means things like variadics and splat that came in 6, those are already there. And yeah, they're working on PHP 7 support now. Along with HHVM, we also get HACC, which is sort of a superset or a syntactic fork of PHP. It's also known as hacklang because hack is ungoogleable. Almost be as bad as calling a language Go. So it features things like type hinting, generics, asynchronous functions, annotations, and a whole bunch more features. But it's also a language subset. So it's a superset in that it has all these extra features, but it's also a subset in that it disallows a number of bad practices. So variables, Sebastian talked about the change to variables in PHP 7. All of that is mostly around variables. You just can't do them in HACC. Wouldn't be a problem. Globals are gone. Mixing HTML and PHP and a few other things are just not available to you in HACC. Performance is the reason for HHVM. Facebook says that if they didn't have it, they would need 3 data centers for their 1 that they have right now. You can imagine that's millions and millions of dollars that they're saving with this. So it makes a lot of sense for them to put a lot of engineering time into it. So here are some benchmarks. These are a little old. I have some newer ones, but we'll start with these. They're more complete. So PHP 5.4 with no op cache is this kind of blue color. We have 5.5, and then we have 5.6, sorry, HHVM with the pre-built binaries for 3.2, which was what was stable then, and 3.2 dev, which is actually, sorry, 3.1 and 3.2. We also have PHP NG, which is what went on to become 7. But this is pre-7. As you can see, at this point, HHVM and PHP NG, they're kind of battling back and forth, and that's been the case since this graph happened. And every, I think, 3 months, they go into what they call a lockdown mode, where they literally lock themselves in a room for like 2 weeks. Like, there's no showers or nothing. It's disgusting. And they have a goal, and typically that goal is performance. They have had a few others, like language parity, but performance is typically the goal. And through that, we have this set of benchmarks. So these are for either the latest version that just came out or the next one coming out. And this is testing on Drupal 7, Drupal 8, Drupal 8 with the cache turned on, MediaWiki, and WordPress. And I do have a key on there, don't I? I just can't see it. It's off the top of the slide. Hang on. I'll bring it back. I don't. So this is PHP 5, 6. This is 7, and this is HHVM. Now, obviously, these numbers come from Facebook. They have kind of a vested interest and a bias in making sure that these numbers look good. These are normalized with 5, 6 being 1, and it's relative to that. So this is throughput. So whatever one you're going, whether it's 7 or HHVM, you're looking probably at 200+%. I do not believe any of the benchmarks that I see with PHP 7 and HHVM that are coming from either Zend or Facebook. Obviously, Facebook knows how to tune HHVM to the nth degree, and Zend has a vested interest in making PHP 7 look as good as possible. And I honestly believe, not through malice, but because they are not Facebook, they don't know how to tune it correctly. And if they could, they would see the same sort of results that Facebook does. Specifically, there's a mode called Repo Authoritative mode, which makes the JIT do a lot more work up front, which gives you about 20 to 25% extra performance. I don't think that's typically being used. And the warm-up for the JIT and stuff like that is really tricky. It's not just like the op cache where everything gets cached every time. It's based on hop pass and things like this. Actual users, Facebook, obviously, number 2 on the web. Baidu is number 5. They're the number 1 search engine in China. Wikimedia, there was a big splash about that. They switched over with Wikipedia. Etsy, they're using it for their APIs. Box.net also switched recently. There's a great case studies on the last 3 there. That also means that 3 of the top 4 PHP sites in the world and 1/3 of the top 10 are running HHVM. This stuff can scale. It is production worthy. But just like with moving to 7, there are some pitfalls. And yeah, Yahoo is the one not currently using HHVM. So I mentioned Repo Authoritative mode. This is used for production when your code is never going to change. So effectively, you've made a release, you push it out, you're not going to be doing daily releases or anything like that. You know that for a week or a month or whatever, this code is going to be out there. It makes sense to take a little more time to warm things up before you push that out to the internet. And it gives you 20 to 25% performance increase. And it's similar to doing, if you've used APC stat equals 0, turns off the file statting. This is similar. It just ignores any changes on the disk. So setting up HHVM is really simple. It's starting to support something else, but currently it only supports fast CGI. So this is PHP FPM, so you have Nginx pointing to PHP FPM, which is going to hit the databases and serve up files. For HHVM, it's basically identical. It's a drop-in replacement, and you can actually use them side by side. So if you want to serve your APIs through HHVM, have the section of your config point to HHVM for those files. It's pretty simple. So this is what it looks like. So this is a standard Nginx server block. So server bracket, server name underscore, because that means it'll answer to anything. We set the root, directory root, the index file. And then for every PHP file, we just do a pass-through to the HHVM socket. So if you've done PHP FPM, this will look really familiar to you. We pull in, we set the index, we send some params through, and we include the default fast CGI stuff. This is identical to PHP FPM. There's also an INI file. You can set where the socket is, the type of server. There was an old event-based server that went away, and now there's a new one coming in. But fast CGI is where you're going to be. You set the source root, which is going to be the same as your document root, log levels and stuff like that, and then you just start it with HHVM-M daemon, which is the user, I believe, that's going to start it, and then C, which is the config file that we have here, and then the user is going to start at. So maybe M is group. It's mode. That's what it is. Starting in 2014, they announced LTS, long-term support. And actually, interestingly enough, the first one of those just ran out of life. So they started at 3.3 on the 19th of September when it actually came out. And that ran through to the 19th of August, so just last month, with the release of 3.9. So this is a very predictable release schedule, which is really important for a lot of us that want to actually keep our stuff up to date. And PHP does this as well with yearly releases. Obviously, HHVMs is a lot faster. But every 6th release is long-term support. All right. I hate this next slide because I quote myself. HACC, it's a better PHP. So a primary goal of HACC is to not negatively impact developers' workflow, especially the REPL, read, eval, print loop, whereby we can edit code and refresh our browser to immediately see changes. So it's not a new language. It runs through the same HHVM runtime as PHP does. It's strongly typed, but those types are thrown away at runtime, for the most part. It's type erasure. It has super fast static analysis, which is really what HACC is. It's not the language or the runtime, it's the static analysis. And with strict typing, they can use that to inform the runtime for better performance and stuff. They're still doing some of that, but that's becoming more and more available. So editor support, basically any editor so long as it's Vim or Emacs. PHP Storm did start on it, and they got rid of it. Unfortunately, it was supposed to be a 9, and they went, nobody's going to use this. Atom, they have Nuclei, which is actually released by Facebook. This is their IDE, and it's based on Atom, and you can install it from the Atom package manager. Sublime Text 3, these all support it. And it really is, I mean, what does support mean? Autocomplete, things like that. Typically the same as you would see for PHP in these editors, really. There are a number of file semantics that are really important. So as I mentioned, part of HACC is ditching stuff that is bad practice, globals, mixing PHP and HTML, these things. So you cannot mix HACC with HTML. All files must start with less than $HH, not PHP. There's no closing tag for HACC files because you can't break out of PHP mode, so why would there need to be one? HACC also has multiple modes, which I'll go into. And if you do want to embed markup, you can do that using something called XHP, which I'll also look into, which is really, really cool. So the modes that are available, there's partial mode. This is the default. It's basically gradual typing. So I have to say this. The way PHP 7 has done typing is nowhere near as good as the way HACC did typing. HACC's typing is beautiful in that it allows you to gradually implement strong typing. So the first mode, the default, is partial mode. So types are strictly adhered to, but they're not required to be defined. So you don't have to put a return type on a function if you're not sure what it's doing yet. It can also call into regular PHP code without any errors, which is great. So if you have a legacy system and you want to start mixing, you can absolutely do that. With partial mode, that's totally doable. And to do that, you just have the open tag. You can do /partial, I'll show you that. But this is pretty simple. We then have strict mode, which is all code must be type hinted. If you fail to put a type hint in, it will fatal error. You cannot call into non-HACC code. So this is a way for you to say this particular code path is completely HACC, completely safe. You also can't have any top-level code. So you can't bootstrap your app. So you cannot have a 100% strict code base at the moment. They are trying to solve this. They will. But right now, you can't have 100% strict code base. Arrays must be type hinted, which is not a restriction in partial. And collections, which I'll also get into, are preferred over arrays. And then finally, we have, so that's what it looks like, the //strict. A lot of people hate this comments to change modes, but it works. It's better than declare. So strict mode looks like that. We then have declarative mode, also known as decal. So type hints are trusted, but they're not required. //decal. So it's kind of halfway between partial and strict. So you're not required to define them, but they will certainly be used if they're there. If you want to ignore errors, which is possible, you just put a / unsafe comment above the block, which is typically from the top of curly brace to the bottom. So if you know that a function is unsafe, you just put / unsafe before it. Please don't do it, but it's there. It's part of their ability to gradually migrate, so it's important. All right, so looking at type hints, you can type hint method arguments and return values, just like you can now in PHP 7. Syntax is very similar. You can also type in class properties, which we can't do in 7. We have ints, floats, strings, arrays, class and interface names, and then I've highlighted resources here because this is a basic type that we do not have in 7 as a type hint. We also have mixed, which is basically the PHP way, so you can do anything. Vectors, maps, sets, tuples, and pairs, and these are all of the types of collections, and really they're classes, so but it's worth putting on here. There are also 2 very special types. One is void, which is for functions that have no return values. This is something they wanted in PHP 7, didn't get in, may still go through later. And it's basically, you have @return void in your doc block. It's the same thing. It's not the returning of a null. It is a return that doesn't exist. And then this, which is great for fluent interfaces, returns $this, whatever that may be in that particular context. We also have nullable types. This is something I really want to see come to PHP 7. So this allows you to say that a typed variable, an input, may be of that type or null, nothing else. And to do this, you prefix it with a question mark. So I want an int or null or a datetime instance or null. So here's a pretty crappy example, but it's an example nonetheless. Class DB adapter public function connect wants either a DSN or a null, and if it's a null, it will just use some sort of defaults. Maybe it pulls them from a config, whatever that is. And it will return PDO or a null. That's why I don't like this. That shouldn't be a thing. But there's the syntax for it. There was actually, in PHP 7, there was a change that made PDO itself not return a null when it fails. And a few other extensions would subtly break, give you a broken object, return a null, not throw an exception, whatever. They now all throw exceptions. Soft types. This is another thing. I don't actually want to see this in PHP. This is actually meant to be a transitional feature. So you can denote that a type failure should not error, but it will log that the error happened. So as I say, this is for migrating. And this is done by preceding with an @. So @int means it should be an int, but we're not 100% sure yet. So don't fatal error, just log it. We'll look at it later. And same for datetime here. So here we have a small calculator class with an add function. It takes possibly an int and possibly another int and possibly returns an int. And even though we're passing in strings here, it will do it the PHP way. It will coerce them into integers. It will still run just fine. So we wouldn't want that to error. But we should know because we're trying to get a strict code base. This is my favorite feature. I want this in 7. Custom types. There are 2 ways to do custom types in HACC. There are type aliases, and there are opaque types. Now, these are only used for static analysis. As I mentioned, HACC really is the static analysis. It's not the runtime. So to create an alias, we use the type keyword, and to create an opaque type, we use new type. So type aliases are just like they sound. It allows you to give a more appropriate name for some existing type and have the same exact functionality. So if you wanted to have a Unix timestamp, you can use Unix time instead of an int. So you do type, I have it in here? No. Type Unix time int. So here's an example of using types or defining types. So I'm actually going to zoom in here. Here we go. I did all this by hand, by the way. It's great. So type HTTP status code is an integer. We define some constants that are of that type, and you see we just assign integers. We then create a map, which I will get into, but it's typed with HTTP status codes and strings, and we see that we're using the constants that we defined as keys, and then strings. And then we type hint here, HTTP status code, that's what we want in, and then we check, does this thing exist in the map? And if it does, we know there's a valid status code. Now, you could still pass in an int, and that's why we have the isset here. If we don't do aliases, we actually don't need that, but we'll see that. So this is calling that. So new HTTP status, send to 404, that works. Or better yet, send HTTP status not found, use the constant, right? Now, opaque types are different. These are meant to be completely custom types, and they hide their underlying implementation outside of the file in which they are defined. So within the file that you define that type, you can modify it as the original type, but outside of it, it's a completely immutable type of data. But that restriction is not enforced at runtime. This is type erasure. This is only static analysis stuff. So this is what it looks like. So instead of type HTTP status, we use new type. And outside of this file, this is no longer an int. This is an HTTP status code. So what that means is if we take our send 404, we actually get from the HACC type checker invalid argument. This is an object, oh, it should be, it's talking about. So this is the line, this is the character columns, start and end, the actual error. So in b.hh, line 15, this should be an object of HTTP status, and it's incompatible with the int that was sent in this file. So we have to do this. This is great. This means we know that we are getting an HTTP status code, not just possibly one. So that is set, can go away. It's great. My favorite feature in HACC, it's really little, but it's something that I really hope we'll see in PHP. It's really simple. How many times have you written this? Set two properties, private left and right, constructor that takes two arguments, then it's just assigned to those properties, right? Everybody writes this. So what constructor argument promotion does is it automatically creates properties from constructor arguments, and to do this, you just precede those arguments with the visibility that you want. So what that looks like is this. Public function construct, private int, and no body. And that will automatically create two properties, left and right, that are private, that are integers, and assign the arguments that are here into those automatically. This is a great example of HACC's desire to not only not impact you as a developer, but also make things easier. They try to make code that we do over and over and over, boilerplate code, they try to get rid of it. All right, collections. This is the big part. All right, so we still have arrays. They must be typed in strict mode. We have tuples, which are typed arrays, and under the hood, they are actually identical. We have pairs, which can only contain two pieces of data and are kind of useless. Vectors, which are numerically consecutively keyed only, so they can only have numeric keys, and they must be consecutive. You cannot have any gaps. This is for performance. We have maps, which are ordered dictionaries that allow you to use ints or strings, but only one. You can't use both, so you'd have to type it. And then sets, which are unordered. And this one confuses me. Like, I'm not really sure what you're doing with that. But it's a completely unordered collection of unique values, and that's the key. They have to be unique. And then they have immutable variants, and we'll get to those. So arrays, this is the definition. So this is untyped, which is only allowed in partial. We then have array, and then we use the square brackets, and we define the type. So this only types the keys, which means you can still put in any type of value. So it's actually identical to doing, say, int mixed would be the same. And then we have fully typed, where we say that not only is it indexed with this type, every single value is going to be of this type. So here we have some strict code, create an array of integer keyed values, and those values can actually be anything. Tuples, as I said, they're internally identical. The difference between tuples and arrays is they are fixed size. And they're implicitly type hinted by the values that you define in them, which may be good or bad. But you can explicitly type hint them for like return types or properties using the literal syntax. So here we have create tuple. Now this is the literal syntax. So parentheses with the types in it. This is what's going to be returned. And then this is how we create a tuple, just like an array, return tuple. And then as I say, the values that are set define the types that it will be as. And from that point on, you can modify the content, but you must put those types of values in. Pairs, as I said, they're kind of useless. They're always immutable. But they can be of any type, just two types. And you just return pair, curly brackets, and whatever those are. This is literally the only example I could think of, and it's very asinine. But whatever. There is one use for them, which I hate, so I'll get to that. Vectors, this is probably the one you're going to use a lot. They can only use integer keys, though. So You have to define the type of values in it, but not the keys. So this is a vector of strings. So, get Dev Evangelist, Davey, Kirsten, you, whatever. Hey, job pitch. Maps. So these are ordered dictionaries. They can have integer or string keys, but it has to be one or the other. And you must specify both the key and value types when you type in them. So here we have map string being returned. And again, we use this literal curly brace syntax, not the array syntax. Under the hood, most of these collections are actually objects, and that's pretty cool. We'll see why later. Sets, an unordered set of values with no keys, have to be unique values. So set of strings, return a set, PHP, HVM, HACC, yay. Immutability, this is cool. So basically to make them immutable, you just put the 3 characters IMM before whichever one you're using. So we have immap. So once we do this, we use an immap instead of a map, we can no longer modify it. And we'll get you cannot mutate this. This is an instance of immap. And that goes for, let's see here. I got notes, but I lost them. Let's see. Come right back to the list. So that goes for, pairs are immutable anyways. Tuples are not the same. So it's vectors, maps, and sets basically is all you can use immutables on. All right. So we talked about immutability, and now let's look at appending elements, so non-immutable. So only vectors allow for the PHP-like syntax of assigning to an empty array key to append to the end. As I mentioned, pairs and tuples are immutable, at least in size, so you cannot add additional elements. Maps allow you to append values, but only by appending a pair. And this is what I hate. This is what it looks like. So create a map, whatever values in it, and you create a pair, and this is the key. The first value is the key, and the second one is the value. This is so ugly, I don't even know what to say about this. But it's there. You can obviously specify the key also, but if you want to do this into an empty thing just to append to the end, you can't. What's cool, though, is they have an object-oriented interface. So if you've ever used any of the SPL structures, like array object, this is kind of based on that. So it allows you to add and remove stuff. There's manipulation methods. And it allows you to use them as objects rather than just better arrays. And that's pretty cool. One caveat of that is that you can break iteration. So in PHP, when you're using arrays, you can actually modify the original array during the lifespan of the for each, say, for this looping over it, because it's using a copy. But because objects are, as we know, referenced, you can't do that. And if you try to do that, you get this wonderful fatal error, invalid operation exception with the message collection was modified during iteration. It simply is not possible. And this is mostly because they can't statically analyze that kind of stuff. Shapes, these are probably my favorite part of structures. So they're like tuples, but they have a predefined structure. They can be used as a form of validation, and that's kind of why I like them, and they ensure integrity of the data that's in them. So here we have a new type, so it's not an alias, it's an opaque type, HTTP request, shape. And we have numerous things that can go into this. So we have a status, which must be our HTTP status code from earlier. We have headers, which is going to be a map of strings and strings. We have the data that's sent in that request, so another shape that has get, post, cookie, and server, but these are all, at least the first 3, are nullable. They may not exist, but server's always going to be there, so we don't make that nullable. And then we have a body, which may or may not exist depending on the type of the request, so that also is nullable, but it's a string no matter what. If you try to assign anything to this that is not one of those types, it will give you an error. So you don't need to say, is this thing what I expect it to be? You just need to put a try-catch around it, and you'll know. It's really nice. Anonymous functions. Now, we have closures in PHP, so this is not new. But with anonymous functions, we get two benefits. One is they're way more concise, and the second one is that the closing scope is automatically available within it. So in PHP with closures, you have to use the use keyword to pass stuff through. With these anonymous functions, everything is available to you directly. So they're more concise, as I said. So this is the most basic anonymous function. So function equals the arguments that get passed in, which would be comma separated, and this double arrow, and then the expression that would be performed upon those arguments and returned. If you want to do multiple expressions, so if you're not just returning an expression, you'll need to put the parentheses here and the brackets here, but it's still way more concise than the PHP one. And again, the scope is available inside. So let's look at this. So here we create a UL, and we have an array walk, which is going to go over some sort of collection of items. And then we create this closure type thing here. So item is going to be the input from array walk. And then we're going to do $list append child, because list is available within inside this anonymous function. And we're going to put in $item in an li tag. And then we echo out the list. Now, if you're looking at this, you might be a little confused as to what the heck I'm doing, because I don't have any quotes or anything on here. This is XHP, and this is also really cool. So XML fragments as expressions. They have taken XML and made it a top-level syntax. XML tags are now valid syntax. They're no longer strings, which is really, really important. That means that we can now differentiate between tags and content, which means we can auto-escape stuff for security when we're outputting it. It also gives us great object-oriented semantics, which allows you to do composable widgets for templating, for example. One caveat, they must all be XML, so closing tag on your BRs and such like that. But that's not a big deal. So echo, hello world, no quotes. It's great. So classes are defined. You can create your own XHP tags by prefixing them with a colon. And every class extends from X element. And they're kind of DOM-like, pretty close. You have append child, prepend, replace, get children, all this stuff. If you've used the DOM, you're probably familiar with all of these. So this is the PHP way of creating a list. Echo UL for each items, echo LI, do the HTML entities, echo the closing LI, echo the closing UL, right? Yeah. In HACC, again, remove boilerplate, remove repetitiveness, make it more concise. Create a list and append children. That's it. This is great. There's also something called XHP Bootstrap. This is a little verbose for my liking, but it kind of shows what's available. So this is a Bootstrap dropdown where they've created custom tags for everything in Bootstrap, and this is available on GitHub. It gives you validation. Like, why do you want this verboseness? It gives you validation. Any invalid tags are errors. Any attribute values, they're validated, they're typed. You get semantic markup. All of your tags are more descriptive. You can grep in your code a lot easier. You get encapsulation. You can create reusable complex components based on these in your own tags. You can have a tag that says our menu, and it would have everything in it that is your menu. And they're future-proof. So if you use Bootstrap 2 and move to 3, you know what a pain that was. That goes away with this. It's all in the underlying implementation. It's not in the tags themselves. There's also a bunch of other features in HACC. Asynchronous MySQL, memcache, and curl since 3.6. Asynchronous functions in general. Annotations, which are pretty cool. There's one called memoize, which if a function is always going to return the same value for the same input, it will cache it automatically for you. You no longer have to do that. So something like MD5, which always gives the same result for the same input, it will just store that and call it back later. Performance, great. They have things like enums, generics. Someone was asking about generics earlier. That is in HACC. And there's a whole bunch more stuff in HACC. All right, so command line tools. As I mentioned, HACC is static analysis, not really the runtime. And there's two parts to that. There is HHServer. So this is basically an iNotify-based daemon that will monitor your file system for changes. It validates the files using static analysis, and then it will analyze both .php and .hh files that have the $HH open tag. You also have HH client, which will start HH server if necessary, so you don't have to do that yourself. It retrieves the results of the static analysis from HH server. So HH server just creates them and sort of stores them, and HH client is responsible for displaying that to you. And it will display them in the CLI. So those errors that you saw earlier, those were HACC output, HH client output. It allows you to integrate into editors and IDEs. So an editor or an IDE can talk to HH server directly, or it could, if it wanted, parse the output. I think HH client does do like JSON output and stuff like that as well. And each line, as I mentioned, has the file, the line that it is, the start column, the end column, and some sort of error. So here is a little piece of code. Function greeting, string who, return void. It returns a string. Function say hello has no arguments, echo greeting 1.0. There's a lot of problems with this. So in the file, line 3, you cannot return a value. So we have a void, and we're trying to return something. Pretty obvious. Was expecting a return type hint. The reason we're expecting a return type hint, line 6, here, you must have its strict mode. So it must have a type hint. It should be void in this case. We have an invalid argument because we're passing 1.0 into something that expects a string, and it tells you all of this. So this is great. This is very, very obvious. And for some reason, I have that on this slide. I have no idea what it is. All right. This is what it looks like in Vim. So basically, it'll pop up a little window, and you can see it all here. It's pretty nice. This is a little crushed, but it works pretty well. All right, refactoring. You have a huge PHP code base. How the heck do you move to HACC? All right, so there's a refactor function in HHClient. It's not very good, but it's there. It allows you to rename classes, functions, or methods, but it doesn't support namespaces yet. And it static analyzes them to make sure that those changes are less error-prone, but you're probably not going to use it because you have namespaces, right? This is what it looks like, though. So HHClient check -- refactor. It will ask you which one of these class functions or methods you want to change. You put in the function name, what the new name is going to be, and it will tell you how many files it rewrote. This is incredibly fast as well. Then we have this process called hackificating. Now, this is actually useful. This is Facebook's term. It's a technical term, hackificating. And this is for converting from PHP to HACC, which is what we're going to do. So the hackificator will do very little stuff. It will change the opening tag, which is important. It will add soft type hints. We saw those earlier with the ampersand. It will just log. Then you run the code in production with the soft type hints, and you gather those logs that it creates. And then you can feed those back into the command line tools, and they will remove any invalid hints and make sure there's no invalid stuff. And then it will harden the type hints. It will remove all the ats that are valid. So the hackificator. All it does is actually just change that opening tag. So hackificator, dot. It will work on every PHP file in that directory. If you then use HHServerConvert, we want the current directory where the code resides and where you want it to end up. I want to do it in place, which is terrible, but there you go. So here we have something. This is from like Zend barcode or something from ZF1. Public static function make barcode, barcode config equals array. And as you see here, it adds @ question mark, so it knows it's probably nullable. Which doesn't, I guess it does. @ array here, and @/Zend/barcode object interface. So it actually goes as far as to know all the instance types that are coming in. And it will soft type hint all of those things. So as I said, you want to then verify those by running it in production or in your test suite or something like that. And you capture the log file from that. And that log file has, hey, these type hints, either they didn't show up in that log file at all, so you have to make sure everything runs, or the type hints were bad, and they're just removed at that point. You then have to, it'll tell you which ones are removed. You can go in and add them by hand. So you do this by passing it into hack remove soft types. Delete from log, and you pass in the log. It is dumb. It needs the pass in the log file to be identical to the pass on your current disk. Yeah, sorry. So that will just remove the soft typing. And then this will actually, this will remove the invalid types. This then, hack remove soft types, -- harden, and the file name will then remove these soft types. And to run it over all the files in the directory, because it's file by file, go grab that from my slides. Facebook did convert everything pretty much to HHVM. They've got a wonderful graph where you kind of see a little bit, and then they run the hackificator the first time, and they're just like this stepping up graph. They moved ginormous pieces of code, hundreds of thousands of lines with this process. It does work. So, some resources. hacklang.org is the official manual. It's based on the PHP doc manual. It's very comprehensive. It's pretty good. HHVM.com, they have a great blog as well. And then I wrote a series of blogs at Engine Yard called Building a Better PHP, which covers a lot of this. If you have any feedback, as mentioned, go on Joined In. At dshafik on Twitter, me at daveyshafik.com. daveyshafik.com/slides. These slides should already be there. That QR code is joined in if you want to grab it. And that is everything. Thank you. I'd love to have some questions.
Hello.
Hi.
Very nice talk. I have been interested in HACC for quite a while, but never tried it for obvious reasons. Anyway, so my question is, you said that maps, sets, and other collections are like objects. So can you actually extend them?
Can you actually extend them? I don't believe so. They are kind of special. So I don't think so.
Thanks.
I could be wrong. I'd love to be wrong. I'll go check that. Anything else?
Hi. As a layman, just looking at the codes, the syntax looks kind of messy. How is it in day-to-day use? Is it readable?
Most of the syntax is very similar to PHP now with type hints and such. I didn't find any problem with it, but I've never worked in a statically typed language before. This was my first exposure to that. I liked it. And I think that, it's more about coding standards, and trying to fit it on a slide is kind of crappy. So I wouldn't take too much out from my slides looking not so great. So, but yeah, it's great.
And another question, do you know if any, because kind of PHP is being forked at the moment, you have PHP 7 and you have HACC, and are there any plans to merge features between the two? Any ideas?
There's no official arrangement. Obviously, we've seen already that a lot of the new features coming to PHP are inspired by HACC. It's kind of a playground where we can see things in use. We can see what syntax might look like, and is it nice to use. We have this opportunity, and it's great, and we've been using that. But again, there's no official type of thing. So for example, the short closures, the RSC for PHP uses tilde arrow rather than the double equals arrow because they don't want to confuse it with the array syntax. So yes and no. It's a great way to see new features that fit into the PHP way a lot better, except for types, apparently. Anything else? In front here? Right here. Right in the front row. Right here.
I can yell, though. Oh.
There we go.
So who do we have to bribe? Wow. So I said I'm super loud. Who do we have to bribe to get generics into 7?
I don't know. There is an RSC for it.
I know, but...
Anthony wrote a really hacky PHP-based thing. You can go use that. I don't know. There is no one to bribe. It's the PHP voting. Do you have a voting account? You should fix that. Contribute to PHP, and you too get to decide what gets into it, sort of. Anything else? Generics are kind of cool, but I've never really found a use for them.
Does one have to be really like brave just to go and try it?
To try it, no.
Do you suggest just take some days just to rewrite, just to run the hackificator and run some production code in it on local and just try it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you have a test suite especially, that's a fantastic way to kind of do the conversion, don't put it in the same file as I did, and run your test suite on it, see what it does.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, give it a try. There are VMs and stuff available, but there's Ubuntu packages, Debian packages, and I think Red Hat packages that they produce nightlies and official builds for. Anything else? All right, thank you.